The Stray, the haunter of Minecraft's coldest biomes. Yet, there is a dark secret about this mob that has laid hidden for millions of years. But today, those secrets all come crumbling down as we explore the origin story of Minecraft's first Stray. It all began long ago, during one stormy night in a plains biome, as there was a skeleton walking across the land near to a plains village. There was nothing special about this skeleton, or so it seemed, as he just had an ordinary bow with ordinary arrows, and he lived an ordinary life. Until at one moment, whilst jumping over a ravine, when he was struck by lightning. Now, normally when that happens to a skeleton, they die instantly. But this young skeleton didn't, as instead the electric shockwaves did a small amount of damage to him. But with all this electricity flowing through him, somehow a memory lost millions of years ago that was somehow still in the back of the skeleton's brain was activated. And so he could see himself in the past. He was in a massive city, but he was different, as he was a villager. He was confused, but his memory kept on playing. He was now walking through the city halls when suddenly something happened and, well, it became unclear. He began walking forward, but then he had another memory as he was struck by lightning again. And this memory seemed to be from later that night, from the first memory. And he was nearby a lake, but he was now a skeleton. He was confused, but he continued walking forwards, dazed by what had just happened. But then he was struck again by lightning, and he had another memory that he was able to recall, as he could see himself with a villager in a cave, and they were working together. And well, everything beyond that point became unclear, and he wasn't struck by lightning again, so he couldn't remember anything else. And so he stood there for a moment. It was unclear to him what these memories would have meant, or why they were only coming back to him now. But one thing was clear to him, and that was that the skeletons and villagers must have had some sort of ancestral relationship where they were benefiting each other, and that sadly that relationship over time had deteriorated to where they were today, where the villagers lived in comfort in their villages and the skeletons lived outside in the cold and misery. But still, that idea that the villagers and skeletons were once working together in peace gave that skeleton an idea that he could become a villager again and move into the luxurious village. And so, seeing as there was a village right beside him, he decided to wander right into it, to tell the villagers about his vision. And he was certain that if they knew this knowledge, they would all accept him instantly. However, in actuality, as he walks into that village to try and explain himself, insults were just hurled at him.
We weren't part of the primitive skeleton species. Liar! You didn't even like that smash button. We don't want you here.
And so, seeing that the villagers just didn't want him, he began to think that maybe those memories were just dreams, and that none of that really ever happened. But deep down, he believed that they were real, but he didn't know what to do, and so he just wandered out of the village. But as he walks further and further away, an old villager approaches him, running from that village.
Hey, you! I have something to say. None of my villager friends want to accept you. But I would love to have you join, as I think that a world where skeletons and villagers unite would be a world of prosperity and peace. However, you'll need to gain the approval of everyone else before that ever happens. But I think I know a way how you may be able to do so. You see, thousands of years ago, legends began to spread, as supposedly the great god of the overworld dropped a crystal from the heavens of the gods into the seas of the overworld. And this crystal is sold to give anyone who touches it demigod-like powers. And so I believe, after all the research I've done throughout my entire life on this crystal, the legends are true. You would become a demigod, meaning that anyone that could find this could potentially unite the skeletons and villagers into one species, and that can be done with just a simple spell. However, it's not as simple as that, as thousands have died looking for it, and so far, none have succeeded, and it's been my life's work to find it. But like many before me, I too have not found it. But I have done a lot of research though, and I do believe that I have found the final clue on its whereabouts, and it comes from this map. However, I'm far too old now to go looking for it, but perhaps you may be able to find it. Good luck.
The skeleton took a hold of that map as the old villager ran back to the village. And he knew at that moment he had to go after that crystal, as even if there was just a 1% chance that this was all real, it could drastically improve the lives of every single skeleton. And so he began running, trying to find that X on the map. And for a number of days, he kept on running and running and running, and he was getting closer and closer and closer to the X. He was going to find it very soon, as he was making a lot of progress. But then he encountered an obstacle that he knew he wouldn't be able to get through, as he had just arrived at a snowy tundra. Now, today, that's not a problem, as we can just walk right through the tundra and everything is fine. But back then, in these ancient times, the tundra was much colder, and so anyone that ever dared to enter it would freeze to death within hours. But the fear of death didn't dissuade the skeleton, as he knew he was getting very close to that crystal. In fact, he believed that this legendary crystal was within this tundra. And so, once again, he began running. And well, after a few hours of searching, he was able to find nothing, and he was nowhere closer to the X on his map. And he was now dying as the frost was getting to him. He didn't know what to do, as there was no way that he could return to the safety of the plains before he froze to death. And so he had no other choice but to move onwards. And he was doing that when suddenly in the distance he saw something. A village. He was confused, as it was believed that all life here was killed within hours, but he didn't have the time to be confused for too long, as he was going to be dead in just a few minutes. And so he ran into the village before blacking out due to the freezing of his brain. Hours passed and somehow he was still alive. He was amazed at this. He must have been helped by someone. And so as he opened his eyes, he saw villagers surrounding him.
He's alive? Should we help him? Has he subscribed yet? What is he?
He was about to run away, knowing that the villagers don't want him, when a kind young villager spoke.
Creature, are you okay? You look like you are freezing there. Did you need any help?
The skeleton was stunned, as only that old villager in his entire life had ever dared to help him. And so he explained everything to these kind tundra villagers. And all of those villagers were very intrigued, as their tundra society had only formed after the extreme cold had forced them to isolate. And so because of that, they hadn't interacted with any other villagers for thousands of generations. And so they were both shocked and sad to hear how the other villagers were so aggressive and so mean, as they were never taught to behave like that. And so they wanted to help the skeleton achieve his mission. And so they gave this young skeleton some food, as well as a thick coat to keep warm in the cold, and sent him on his way, wishing him the best on his searches. The skeleton was very happy, as he never expected the villagers to be such nice beings, and because of that, he became even more motivated to find that crystal, so that in the future, all villagers would be like that. And so he was now running faster than ever before. And so after just a few days of traveling in the cold, he had found it. He was right on the X. But where was that crystal? It was nowhere to be seen. And at first, he felt as if this was all a lie. This legend didn't exist. But then he realized something. He was standing on an iceberg, so maybe that means that the crystal was underwater. He knew what he had to do, and so he jumped down from the glacier and broke a hole in the ice. Then he began swimming downwards. He looked at his map again, making sure that he was in the right spot, and when he was, he began digging with his shovel. This must be it, but at first, he didn't find anything. and then he began to drown. He looked up and saw that his hole had frozen over. There was no escape anymore. He had to find that crystal. If not, he was going to die trying. And so he continues to dig and dig, but still, he had no luck. But as he took his final breath, he found it. It was a small crystal, and it glowed like a diamond. It was magical. And so he leant down to touch it, when instantly, lightning struck him. And his eyes began to glow, and he could feel the waves of power surging through him. His cold suit even began tearing off him, and finally, all the water around him froze, as he now radiated extreme coldness. He had become the first Stray. He looked into the ice around him to see all the changes they had gone through, and he was impressed. Also, around his neck now was a necklace, and it had a pendant that was made from that magical crystal. But was he actually a demigod, like the legend said he would be? Well, he wanted to find out, and so he began thinking what he wanted to do, but as he thought about these crazy ideas, they just started to happen, and so he began thinking of a way to get out of this small icy cage that he was within, and so his pendant began to glow, and the water split from above, and a hole emerged into the sky, allowing the Stray to leave the ocean, as he could now fly. He was amazed with himself, as he never truly believed that this would all happen. He just hoped it would, and he couldn't wait for what was coming next, as he planned to unite the skeletons and villagers very quickly. But before he was going to do that, he wanted to thank all those villagers that had helped him, and so he flew back to the village and told them what happened. They too were excited for a future world where the skeletons and villagers would be working collaboratively, making the Minecraft world a better place. But then one villager stood forward.
Hey, Mr. Stray, you should cool down the tundra so that us and all the other villagers can once again interact, and we'll no longer be isolated here.
That sounded like quite a good idea to the Stray, as he was planning on uniting everyone eventually, and so using his pendant, he began casting a spell. And in a spectacle of flashing lights, colours and sounds, the temperature of the tundra and all other surrounding cold biomes suddenly fell. It was still very cold there, but now it was warm enough that you would no longer freeze to death just by entering it. And so this village, along with all other tundra villages, were finally free. But the Stray was a demigod, not a full god, and so there were some consequences of casting this spell. And these consequences were nothing that the Stray had expected. As now every single skeleton that was within those icy biomes at the time of the spell being casted was now cursed into being transformed into clones of the Stray. And they were also cursed with never being able to leave the icy biomes again for the rest of their lives. Also, their arrows were now tipped by a slowness potion, as that was the Stray's most hated potion effect, as in his earlier life he had been inflicted many times with it from the witches, and so it caused him quite some stress whenever he saw it. Now, that doesn't sound all too bad, but really these consequences were devastating, as those rules of not leaving the cold biomes also applied to the original Stray, which meant that he could never leave, and so he would never be able to see the other parts of the overworld, and thus he would never be able to unite the skeletons with the villagers. But just as his dreams of a united world began to crumble, a voice spoke to him. It was coming from the pendant. It was the spirit of the overworld.
You know, they were banished from all other villages for a reason, right? You know what? I can't be bothered to fix this right now. This is your problem, as you are a demigod now, so you should be responsible for this world too. Good luck fixing this. And if you don't, well, this will happen to our beloved world.
The Stray began seeing wars between the villagers and the skeletons, and then he sees the void consuming the entire overworld. But what could he do now, as the spell had already begun and the unification of the two species was beginning to happen, and they had already began their trajectory of violence at the end of the world. There was nothing he could do to stop it, but it was at that moment that he thought of an idea. A dark, evil idea, but an idea nonetheless. And that idea was to eliminate one side of this war, so that the overworld would not be doomed to die. And so he turned back to the villagers and began drawing his bow, and began on a rampage of destruction as he killed the newly freed villagers, as that way they will never unite with the skeletons, and thus their future war with the skeleton and the end of the world would not occur. And so the Stray would continue on this rampage for a number of weeks, until one day when he reaches a cookie baker, and that baker would change the course of history for the Minecraft world with his actions. But to find out how, you'll need to watch this video.